Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. This is Keeping Ministry Leaders Up to Date on Finances with Church360 Ledger. This is an overview webinar of Church360 Ledger, and we'll be covering all the basics, but we're going to have this primary focus on how do you keep ministry leaders up to date on where they're at? How do you use your church finance software to faithfully manage the finances, which part of that is keeping everybody in the loop. So my name is Peter Frank. I am the Senior Manager of Concordia Technology Solutions. I've been with our group for about, going on 6 years now. Been with our organization for over 10 years. So you can reach me there. My email is the best way to get a hold of me, but you can also call me on my phone. That goes right to the office phone right there, although I'm not in my office as much as I am really right now during this webinar, because I'll be here for an hour, for the full hour, and that doesn't happen a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and take my earphones out. We do have it so that all of our attendees are muted. We typically have too many people here to have a conversation about it, and since it is being recorded, it's best that I'm the only voice that's going out, but we'll take questions throughout. And in fact, that leads me to our housekeeping items. My plan is about 55 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for questions. Now, if you have questions, please ask them throughout. It'll go in this queue that I have over here. And so I'll be able to keep an eye on it during the webinar today. And if there's something that I can answer during the presentation, I'll do that. Sometimes I get so involved I don't look towards until closer to the end. But as we get closer to about 15 minutes till or so, I'll check over there to see how many questions we have so I know how much time to allow for questions. So even though I'm planning 5 minutes, that's typically what it goes, I can always stop a little sooner if we've got a lot in the hopper. All right, the last thing here, we are recording this and the recording will be shared. So if you have to step away or if you'd like to share this with somebody else in your congregation, we'll be sending the recording out to everybody who registered. So I know we had several people who said they couldn't be here live, but they'd love to hear the recording, so we'll send that out to them. If you are watching the recording after the fact, thanks for tuning in, even though you couldn't be here live. The main disadvantage is you can't ask the questions live, but you can always ask the questions. So feel free to send me an email or give me a phone call afterwards. All right, a little bit about ourselves here. I mentioned that I've been with our organization for a little over 10 years. That is Concordia Publishing House. So Concordia Technology Solutions is the church administration division of Concordia Publishing House, although we are one and the same. We've been developing software for churches since 1984. So well before the time of Windows, we were already doing software to serve churches. So we've been at this for a little while, and we're always learning new things, and churches are learning new things, or church workers, I should say. And so we're working in partnership with you to leverage technology in your ministry. And church finance software is one of the ways we do that. A little bit about Church360 Ledger. Now, Church360 Ledger is part of the Church360 suite, and we call that complete church management. Now, obviously, finances alone are not complete church management. It also includes our other app, Church360 Members, which is about membership, attendance, offerings. And then we also have Church360 Unite, which is all about communication. So it is your church website, your blog, your mass email, your intranet, if you're familiar with that term, or the place where you can go log in and interact with others in your church in a safe and secure environment. So I may mention those a few times. They are not the topic of the conversation. We're really going to focus on Church360 Ledger. Now, Church360 Ledger, as you're probably aware, is church finance software. We have built it to be intuitive, secure, and focused on ministries. And I'll explain a little bit about that as we go through here. So a few assumptions that I've made before we get started. I always like to make assumptions about my audience because it helps me plan a more tailored message for everyone. So I'm assuming you're familiar with church finances. You don't have to be a pro. You don't have to be an accountant, just a little bit familiar. And we're going to go through some of the core functionality that might be a little bit introductory level. So if you are more than familiar with church finances, that might be a little bit too basic for you. But I want to make sure that everybody understands how to do these core financial actions within the software. So I'm going at the idea that people are familiar but not absolute experts. I am assuming you're new to Church360 Ledger. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be completely new. You may have been using it for a few months or a year or more. If you have been using this for several years and it's working for you, there's probably not going to be a lot of new information in here or surprising information, but it's certainly going to be a good review. But for those of you who are new to Church360 Ledger, I'm going to give you enough of an overview. You'll get a flavor for what it's about. And finally, I'm assuming you're extremely busy. So if you need to step away, if you need to be interrupted, that's why we have the recording. So you can watch this after the fact if you need to. All right, so let me ask you a few questions. If you could tell me about yourself, this will help me as we go forward. I've just got a few short questions. We'll spend about 20 seconds on each one. So if you could let me know what your primary role at church is, which one best describes your primary role? I know that many of us wear multiple hats in the church, and so this is just saying which one is your primary role. All right, looks like we've got almost everybody in the financial manager role with at least one pastor in there, so very good. Thank you for answering that. My next one is, are you currently using Church360 Ledger in your congregation? Yes, no, or no, but planning to soon. So that'll help me. Looks like we've got a nice mix of current users and soon-to-be users. So very good. All right, mostly current users. It's over the 50% mark, so that's good. All right, and for those of you who are using it, what would you consider your skill level to be? If you are at that expert level, let me know. If you are at the lower level, like the newbie level, that is good to know too. That'll help me figure out how much, what level of detail I should go into. All right, everybody's at intermediate or below, so that's very good. All right, well, thank you for answering those questions for me. If you have questions throughout, I'd love to hear about them, and I'd like to test out the questions tool to make sure you know where to put them. So if you look on your screen, there should be a place for you to enter in some chat note messages. If you want to let me know where you're watching from and maybe what you're drinking today. I have my water. I already finished my coffee. It's a fun way to get people involved. Just drop a note in there. That helps me make sure everybody knows where to put those questions so that as we go, you have a good place to put the questions. So, all right, let's see what we've got here. So I've got Margot in Madison, Nebraska. And Marsha's here, and she's drinking water just like me, so that's good. Normally, I have all my coffee in the morning, and by the afternoon, I switch to water. And those are about the only two things that I drink. All right, very good. Well, let's continue on. Thanks for filling those out. That helps me. I know we've got others coming through as well. All right, so the outline for today, we're going to go through an overview of Church360 Ledger, and that will give the basic functionality. And we're going to fit the same narrative throughout. We're going to talk about a new ministry we're going to set up and then kind of track as we go through it. Keep that ministry leader informed. We're going to do a tour of the software and question and answer. So throughout that tour, we'll have the same story going through. And by the end of it, you'll have both an understanding of how to use Ledger for this specific use case, but then also understand a little bit where everything is. All right. All right, Marie and Nancy are here drinking Diet Coke and water. Thanks, Maddie. I appreciate it. Oh, is it Maddie or Marie? I think I've got, maybe there's a typo there, Marie. So thank you very much for joining us today. All right, so let me give you a little bit about the thoughts behind Church360 Ledger, because I think that'll help give you an idea of where we're coming from. So we understand that church finances are often managed by volunteers. While every church would love to have a paid person on staff to manage finances, it's not always practical. So volunteers often are the ones who manage it. Now, most volunteers are not accountants. Again, many churches are blessed to have volunteers who are accountants, but that is not the norm. So accountability becomes even more important when it's in the church. Accountability is important wherever you're using finances, but when you start looking at it from the fact that you have volunteers who are not accountants, we need to be able to keep everybody accountable for those finances. It's good stewardship. So we look at how do we help prevent the ill intention from doing wrong, because you'll hear stories on the news occasionally of a church having somebody embezzle money from them. But more often than not, we want to prevent the well intention from making mistakes, because these are not experts at finance. And so that's how we've built Church360 Ledger, is to increase that accountability. And we do this in a few ways. We designed it to prevent mistakes, and we also designed it to have what we call friendly paths forward. And I'll show you that in a minute. So as we go through this topic of keeping ministry leaders informed, we're going to look at 4 key areas. We're going to look at how do you set up individual ministry accounts so that you can clearly view where things are, where the finances are coming and going. Because when you start having these broader accounts, that makes it a lot easier to hide things or to not be able to find things. Again, I don't want to make it the assumption that people are doing things intentionally, but potentially making mistakes. We're going to show how you can enlist leaders' helps creating the budget, which my church is going through right now. It's a tough process, because that communication aspect of working with volunteers who have full-time jobs makes it hard to get everybody on the same page. We're going to show how to provide the necessary access. And that's a key part of Church360 Ledger, is because it's web-based, because it has detailed permissions, you can give people the access that they need, the necessary access, no more, no less. And so I'll show you how to do that. And finally, how to share the right reports, whether it being through printing the traditional way, but my preference and what I'm going to recommend is to give people the access to them. And that way they can always be up to date. Everybody always can go and see where things sit right now. All right, so that's enough introduction. Let's go ahead and move forward. I'm going to switch screens to Church360 Ledger. Now, if you are new to Church360 Ledger, this will be the first screen you see. In fact, if you're not new to Church360 Ledger, it'll also be the first screen you see when you log in. And I'll give you a quick overview of the navigation. Up at the top, you have the nice logo for Ledger, and then your books. We'll get into that in just a moment. Over on the far right, you have several icons, and then you have the profile. Now, I'm borrowing the account that our onboarding specialist, Rod Kiles, uses, so that's his picture up there. I'm sure many of you have worked with him already. But you've got a few icons here. You've got the check queue, you've got the pending transactions, the reports, and the settings in that order. We're going to go through those in more or less detail, depending on the subject matter. You have your account bar, which allows you to go and quickly jump to any account within your chart of accounts, which will update the information below. Now, below you have, at this level, everything it's set up in a tree structure, so everything in the tier below that. So if you go into assets, you get that same view, but now you get the sub-accounts under assets, or categories, if that's how it's set up. So there's central trust, and you can continue to go down and see your breadcrumbs over here. Now you can choose to collapse that and see just the chart and the details right there. So we'll look at that in a little while. Over on the right, you have your new transaction screen where you can go down one of these transaction paths. We'll look at those shortly. And then just about every screen has an export to Excel, a print, or a time drop-down. So you can choose what year, what quarter, what month, or any kind of custom date range. So that's going to be very consistent throughout this. There will be some exceptions when you start clicking up in these top icons where you're not going to have the same structure, but most of the work is reviewed through these screens and completed through the transaction window, and we're going to get into all of that. But the first thing I'm going to do is go to settings and books. And let me explain a little bit about books. So if you have a set of books, that is the phrase we went through to say, okay, this is separate from all your other financial activities. So a good example that we use is if you have a church and a school and you don't combine their finances, but you manage them separately, you'll want a separate set of books for each one. And so you might have your school books and your church books. Sometimes, depending on your congregation, those are combined. My congregation combines them, but we have a separate set of books for our men's club. Our men's club manages their finance independently. And I'll hear of many other groups, like maybe an LWML group, Lutheran Women's Missionary League, that's based at the church but manages their finances separately. Now, for simplicity's sake, we're going to create a separate set of books for our example today. So we're going to go through this process of saying that the youth group is planning a mission trip, and an international mission trip. We'll take it that far so that it can be a rather complex project. There's a lot that goes into this. Now, you probably wouldn't want to create a set of books just for that specific one-time event. That's a lot of work to do without having that ongoing thing. So we're going to say in this example that the youth group manages their finances separately from the church. And I'm doing that, we'll switch over to the church's book every now and then just to show it. But the reason I'm doing that is that I want to make sure there's no data there. So everything that's being brought in is being brought in at this time during the webinar. So I'm going to click an add new one, and we're going to call it youth ministry, and they're going to follow our fiscal year, and we're going to start at January 1. So we'll submit that. All right, the book was created. And now we can switch over here up in the top. So we have our general, and then we have our youth ministry. Now, when we go into youth ministry, it's a blank slate, and that's exactly what we are going for. Now, I'm not saying that you need to do this for every ministry to help keep people informed. You can certainly do this outside of that. But if you already manage your church's books separately, different ministries having their own set of books, this is a very easy way of doing it. But otherwise, for presentation purposes, it's just to kind of start at a blank slate. All right, so now what I'm going to do, that is setting up the books. We're going to now set up the chart of accounts. Now, the chart of accounts here is your 4 types of accounts where all your transactions tie back to it. And this is where we're going to start getting into a little bit of finances. Let me show you just a broad overview. So you have 4 types of accounts. You have assets, which are your essentially the places where cash is physically stored. Even that is a bit of a stretch, but like bank accounts. So if you have money in the bank, cash may not all be stored there, but for you, that's real dollars, and that continues year after year. It does not reset to 0 at the beginning of the financial year. Liabilities are kind of the opposite of that. That's not money you have, it's money you owe. So assets is money you have, liability is money that you owe. So it might be things like the church's mortgage, or maybe it is, if your church has a credit card or some kind of debt that they're paying off. It might be something where, as you process payroll, you have taxes that are a liability for you to pay to the government, and that gets zeroed out at the end of each month or however often you pay those. So what it means is that it's the money that technically you currently have, but is really needs to go to somebody else. So you've already received the value. All right, then you have income, which is pretty straightforward. It's money that comes in. Now, this could be offerings, or it could be revenue, if you like to use that phrase, received from exchanging goods or services. So, for example, if you rent out your church building for weddings and you get $50 or $100 or $500 for the rental fee, that is income. It's not an offering. It was exchanged for a good or service. And so you would bring both of those kinds of income into that type of account. And then finally, expense, which I think we all know about. And this is probably, income and expense is where most of the discussion in churches come around. Income, we're always trying to increase, and expenses, we're always trying to decrease. So those are your 4 types of accounts. Now, if you know T-chart accounting, or this fund accounting that we're talking about today, you will understand debits and credits. Now, if you're like me, you might understand the concepts of them, but it's really hard to remember how to do that. So if I want to increase an asset, I need to debit it. If I need to decrease an expense, I need to credit it. And all of those things that become rather difficult to remember if you're not doing it day in, day out, which many of our church volunteers are not. So the key thing with Church360 Ledger is that we do all of this on the back end so that you don't have to think about it. That allows you to give ministry leaders more access or visibility into your church finances, which again goes back to the theme for today. And I'll show you how that goes as we how that works as we go through this. So keep this in mind. We'll reference back to this, maybe even show it again as we go into transactions. All right, now we're going to go back to the chart of accounts. Remember, we're doing the youth group. They are planning an international mission trip. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is create an asset account. Where are we keeping the cash? And so we're just going to call this, let's see, Bank of Bakersville. Bakersville is my fictional town. And we're going to just put in an account number just for reference, and they can write checks from that account. And we're going to start off with, let's say, $500. Okay. Now, we've got that. We have this thing called restricted funds. And I think this is an important thing to clarify what this is for. If somebody gives for a specific purpose in your church, you need to restrict that offering so that it is only used for that purpose. And if they are giving for a general purpose, you can have that be what's called unrestricted. Now, I know some churches will have like dedicated and restricted is in a different bank account altogether. So dedicated says it's coming in, we're putting in this bank account right now. At the end of the month, we're going to move all the dedicated to restricted. That's something that you might want to do. But in this case, right now, we're just going to create a new restricted fund. And we're going to say this restricted fund will be, let's say, on the international mission trip. There's a lot of expenses that go with that, but one of the expenses is the VBS material. The youth group will be leading VBS in a foreign country, and so if somebody wants to donate just to the VBS material, we'll make sure that that goes directly to the VBS material. So we're going to call that VBS material and submit. Now, we have our big bank account. That's where we have our balances, but in it we have unrestricted and then a restricted for VBS material. And I can add more restricted funds if I want. For today, I'm not going to worry about that. All right, we're going to save those changes. It'll give me the details, and I'll hit confirm. The next step is our liabilities. Now, the youth group shouldn't have a lot of liabilities. They're not buying a mortgage, but they might have a credit card that they use so that they can gain airline mileage. That's what my wife and I do. We have our Southwest card where we are constantly putting purchases on it, earning those points and paying it off each month just like it was not a debt. And because if you pay it off each month, you don't have that interest. And so that's how we use it. Let's, for this example, because there's not a lot of other great examples for liabilities within just a youth group, we'll put that in there. And so the new account, which we're going to call, actually, I'm going to back up a second. I haven't shown categories yet. So we're going to do a new category that's called credit card and submit that. And then we're going to add a new account that's called airline credit card. And we'll put in a different account number there and a 0 initial balance and submit that. Now, you'll see here that the categories has a line on the left of it and the account does not. That's because the categories need to be distinguished separately from the accounts, but the categories are basically just like folders or summaries of your accounts beneath that. So you can drag and drop it, put in that tree structure. And so there's our credit card. We only have one account underneath that, but we're still going to do that. So we'll hit save. Confirm those changes. All right, now let's talk about income. So we're going to do a new category, and we're going to call this church income. And we'll have two accounts here. One is going to be offerings, and we'll do a different account number there. You don't have to put account numbers in. Most people like seeing something there, so that's why we do that. An initial balance of 0, and we're going to add, oops, not new category, new account, and we're going to call this pizza sales. So one of the things that the youth group is trying to do is sell pizzas, and they get them at a lower cost, sell them at full market value, they get the difference. It's not offerings per se, because there is a good or service being exchanged, but it is a good way for the youth group to earn income. So if you had an alternate source of income, you could put that as a different category and summarize those separately, even though you'd still need an account there. But we're going to leave it at that. We're going to keep it fairly simple. That was the goal of doing a new book, is to remove some the clutter. All right, now we're going to go into expenses, and we could really go into broad categories here. Whoops. Let me click on expenses first. That would help. There we go. New category. And we're going to call this travel. This is our travel category. And we're going to call the next one ministry. It's all ministry, but you'll see what I mean in a second. So our new account first is going to be airline tickets. And oops, zero account balance. We're starting at zero for all of this. And our new account will also be rental car. And then our new account will be VBS materials. And then maybe we could do another one that says craft materials. My microphone's in the way, so as I get lower on the screen, I can't see what I'm typing, but there we go. So now I can drag and drop travel or airline tickets under travel, rental car under travel, VBS materials under ministry, and craft materials under ministry. And it looks good to me. So I'll go ahead and click confirm and save all my changes. I'm going to pause there for a second. Just to remind you, if you have any questions as we go, please go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them as we get into our Q&A time. All right, so we've set up our chart of accounts, and by doing this to this level of detail, now I can know that travel cost me X amount, and of that, this was rental car and this was airlines. And so as we are holding ministry leaders accountable, we can see exactly what they spent on it. And as they're planning for next time, maybe the 2020 mission trip, the youth leader can go back and see, okay, well, last year we spent $500 on rental cars, and we just got a deal with one of the rental car companies that gives us 20% off. And so now I can see exactly where that is without having to find the receipt, because I'll be able to see my total. So that's why we do these individual charts. But let me go up here, and we're going to go and show the difference between a global view and the book view, and why we'll, as we move into budgets, why we need to have these different books. So on your settings, you've got the top half, which is related directly to your book, and the bottom half, which is directly related to your user accounts. So for example, the general settings here, whoops, general settings are for the church as a whole. The users are for this church as a whole. There's some of my coworkers in there. The roles are also for the church. The books, while they're unique by themselves, is just your collection of books. And finally, payees. And we'll be looking at this as we start creating some transactions. It's a shared account of payees. So if you're paying the same people from different books, you can access it. But everything else on here, the chart of accounts, the budgets, the fiscal years, the recurring transactions, the imported transactions, all of those are unique to this set of books, which in this case is youth ministry. So let's go to budgets. That's the second thing on our list. Enlist Leaders helps with budget. Now, if you've done budgeting before in your church, you know you budget two things. You budget your income and your expense, the money coming in and the money going out. You could try to budget for your assets and liabilities, but it's really just a reflection of reality of the state that it's in. It doesn't help you to budget it, whereas income and expense helps you know how much are we expecting to come in this year and how much are we expecting to go out. And we can make adjustments on our budgets to make sure that it balances at the end of the day, and so that we have no more money going out than money going in. So that's why income and expense is all that shows there. And now when you go into budgets, you get this table. Now, if you are not zoomed in, I'm zoomed in, it'll go through the whole width, and you've got a lot of space to work with. But I'm going to zoom in because it's easier for you to see if I'm zoomed in. Also easier for me to see. And you can see that there is some horizontal scrolling that needs to occur. That's okay. It's not a big deal. It's just expanded outside the page. Now, what you want to budget is those white lines. Everything else that's gray is automatically calculated. So let's say on average, we get $250 a month for offerings. All right, that's not bad. We can go through and type each one, tab over. It summarizes for us, it adds up. $27.50, that's good. Now maybe pizza sales, you say, okay, well this is actually pretty much the same every month, more or less a few bucks, but we get $75 for pizza every month. All right, so I could type in 75 here and it splits it to 625. Maybe that's what I should have gone with. So I'll do some quick math because I don't do math in my head. That's $900. So if we split it up at $900, we got 75 every month. It automatically calculates. And maybe you say, okay, that's great. But as we go into like June, we do a big push and we get 150. Now, what I accidentally did there, but it leads me to my next point. If you click on one of these dollars below that, it'll automatically put that in. And these dollars below it are the previous year's budget. Maybe you budget the same thing every year, hoping that it's going to be the same, or last year's actuals. So last year we got $150 in June, so we're going to put that in there. We don't have that data now because it's a fresh set of books. But you could click the links on the left-hand column and put them all in, or you can click individual ones here and plug them in up above in the budget. So I hope that makes sense. All right, next we're going to go down to expenses. So expenses are probably a little bit easier to calculate because you can control how much you spend. Now you can't always control the prices, but you at least are the one who's cutting the check or swiping the credit card or handing cash. On the income side, it's a little bit tougher because you're relying on other people. So it's not a guarantee. And expenses are not a guarantee, but they're closer. So, all right, let's say that you buy the tickets in April for the airline and it's $5,000. Well, I'm expecting that much. Actually, 5,000 is a lot. Let's do 2,500, not 25,000. All right, rental car is going to be about 5,000, and since we're going on our trip in July, we haven't talked about that, but that's where I'm planning on it. Good. VBS materials means in June I'm buying $125 of that, and then craft materials is going to be about $125 there. At the end of the day, I have budgeted to come in $37.25 and to go out $32.50. So that's $475 difference. That's a surplus. You can see all of that down here. Income less expense, $475. So that's how simple it is to enter the budget. But our goal was, how do we enlist the help of others to do that? Well, one way to do that is to export this to Excel. And this is really what I recommend doing. So after you set it up, maybe you put in your initial budget that you think is right. Take it and send it out to Excel, and it's coming up over on this screen. Let's move it over here. All right. Now I forgot the dollars didn't come up because I haven't saved my changes yet. Something to remember to do, always save your changes. All right, let's try to do that again. We don't auto save because you might be doing a lot with the budget and you don't want every single thing to save, and this way you can reset it. Let's try this again. While that loads, I'm going to take a sip of water. There we go. Okay. All right, so now I have this spreadsheet that has all my budgets in there that I've entered, and it'll automatically calculate the other roles. Now let's say you send this out to your team, to your ministry team for youth ministry, or maybe you are the finance person sending it out to the youth leader, and the youth leader says, well, actually, no, rental cars, if we order in advance, we can get it for only $400. So I'm going to order it in March. Well, if you want to put that back in, all you have to do is select a certain number of cells. In this case, we're selecting rental car January through December, copying that, going back to rental cars in January, pasting that, and it adds that 400 in there. You do have to remove the 500 because it ignores zeros. That way, if you only want to update certain things, it could just be the zero. So if you're putting in a few cells, but you can do this in bulk, and that's what your ministry leaders can do. So maybe you send this out to all your ministry leaders and say, okay, fill in your budget and send it back to me, and you start populating it that way. You should also be able to do this in a big mass way by going up to any cell, hitting paste or cell, and it fills in the difference. So that is one way of doing it. And again, oops. Yeah, that's I'm not sure why that popped in there, but you always wanted to double check it and say, okay, 575 income and expense, 575 income and expense, that's good to go. So that's another way that you can do it. The last way that you can do it would be to just give people access to this view and go from there. So let me make sure on my outline, yeah, roles and users are where we're going next. So we'll go ahead and save this update. And we're going to go to roles first. Now this last way is a possibility depending on how much level of trust you have with the people who are leading your ministries. So roles are collections of permissions. So if somebody is an administrator, they can do everything. In this case, if somebody is an assistant administrator, they can't do a lot. They can view 3 selected accounts and that's it. Oh, excuse me. It's getting warm in my office because I turned my fan off while I present. All right, let's do youth ministry role. Oh, I already have that there. Okay, good. You can add as many roles as you want, but here's our youth minister. And this applies, and we'll say this applies to youth ministry. They cannot manage the chart of accounts. That's the finances job. We'll put that in there, but they can manage recurring transactions. They can view all accounts on youth ministry. And they can also do some things like create deposits, create payments. They can't print checks, so we won't allow that. But they can do transfers and they can create checks. And we'll leave it at that. So if they can manage the chart of accounts, they can put the budget in. If they can't manage it, they can't touch any of those things. We'll go ahead and put it in there because it is the youth ministry leader. We could do a different one for youth ministry volunteer and leave off some of those things that doesn't matter as much for the volunteers, but the youth ministry leader needs to have that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and submit that. Then I'll go in and say, all right, I need to add this youth minister as a leader. So I'll go to users and we'll put my name in today, pretend I'm the youth leader. Add that new person. All right, so roles is youth minister and we'll submit that. All right, the user has been created and has been notified via email. Now I have my email closed, so I won't pull that open, but now I can log in as myself and not Rod and be able to do those things, but only for youth ministry, not for the general set of books. So that's one way, or one more way, of how you can provide people with the tools needed to help with the budget. And so I could log in and I can go under budget and say, okay, I'm going to make a few tweaks because I'm closer to the information than our financial person is. So that's great. All right. The next thing is provide the necessary access. We talked about that a little bit, but the necessary access to conduct the transactions. So we already did that some, but let's show how to do the transactions. So the first one we're going to do is transfer. And this is a pretty straightforward idea. You're transferring money from one account to another. Well, in this case, we're not going to transfer from one account to another. We're going to transfer it from our restricted fund to an unrestricted fund. So that's our first transaction path. So in here, we've made it to kind of look like your checkbook, just because that's what people are often familiar with. We're going to say, all right, from the unrestricted Bank of Bakersville account, unrestricted, we're going to move $100 into that VBS Materials, VBS Material restricted fund. So let's say that we already know we're setting this up. $100 was given just for VBS Materials. We need to transfer that over. Now you see here, unrestricted is being credited and VBS Materials is being debited. What does that mean when you are an asset account? So an asset account, when you debit it, it increases. And when you credit it, it decreases. So if you look at this, both of these are assets accounts. But I'm crediting the one, decreasing unrestricted, and crediting that one, debiting VBS Material, so I'm going to increase it. Now for the average layperson like myself, I'm just going from unrestricted and moving it into VBS Material. And that makes sense to me. I don't have to worry about debits and credits. And that's how you can give the ministry leaders the right access they need, regardless of their knowledge. You can teach them how to do these simple transaction paths, which helps them stay in the loop on things. So we'll go ahead and click Save there. transaction was created. Let me go back to the home screen. There we go. So we have initial balance entered in, and then we have this other one, which is the transfer. So we're transferring from unrestricted to VBS material. Let's do another transaction. The next one is a deposit. So let's say that we got our weekly offerings in, and we got some money for both accounts. All right, so weekly offerings for May, what was last Sunday? I should just check. We'll say May 20th. All right, the asset, we're depositing all of this into the unrestricted bank of Bakersville. And let's say we got another $500. And pizza sales was $450 of that. It automatically tells me how much I have left to make this a balance statement. So I'm sorry, let's make offerings. That would have been more sense. And pizza sales was $50. Now this is a balanced transaction, meaning that both sides have the same amount. So you can see that down here. Debits and credits are listed. Both are equal to each other, so this is a valid transaction. But maybe we $75 of the offering was for VBS materials, so we can put that in there. And it's saying I'm now expecting another $75 to come across. We'll put that as $425 and $500 and $500. So that is now a balanced transaction that we can go and enter in. So we are depositing weekly offerings that is going to be split between unrestricted and restricted and be split from offerings and pizza sales. Because they came in on the same day, we want to make one bank transaction, but still have it divided up accordingly. So we'll save that. And now that's in place. So you see here that there's a deposit for unrestricted and a deposit for VBS material. There's also a transfer from unrestricted, and that's what we did before. All right, so I hope you're following. I know I can go a little bit fast sometimes, but we're moving right along. Now, there are some things with transactions you should know about. One, if you click on a transaction and view it, you can see all the details and see exactly where everything went. That's kind of your audit trail. It only shows you what was entered. And depending on your access, if you're an administrator, you have access to everything. So it also shows you the T-chart account line there and all your details, such as deposit name, date, pay is optional, and these other things. Now, you may want to do this same transaction again. You can copy that, and now you're copying a copy, creating a copy, pardon me, of a deposit. Now you can change whatever you want and put it in there, and it'll send it separately. So, all right, next let's take a look at make recurring. So I'm going to close out of this. I'm going to go back here. Let's say that every week you get deposits, and every week you know they're the same kind of accounts that are tied in there. So we'll click make recurring, and it says every single week on Sunday. All right, we'll hit save. Now, you and I know that we're probably not going to get the same amount of offerings every single week unless they're all electronic offerings set for the same amount, or you have a bunch of creatures of habit. What's nice about that, though, is that even if it's not the same amount, these recurring transactions show up under a pending transaction anytime you need it. Now, pending transactions could also be from Church360 members, which are deposits from the offerings. So that could be as well. But it'll show up just like that, and you click on the action button that's given to you, and then you can say, okay, well, actually, this was 1,400, and start switching things around. And the important thing is that it balances. And Church360 will tell you if something is not balancing well. So by adding it in there. So that's something I wanted to clarify. The next thing is payments, and we're going to do payments and then checks, and then the last thing is journal entries. We're going to go through those kind of quickly. So payments, memos are optional, although I always like to do this. So let's say VBS starter kit. Payee is the one and only Concordia Publishing House. Asset or liability, now we could take it out of unrestricted, but this is VBS material. So we're going to click the VBS material. And I don't know how much these are these days, but we'll say 75. I think that's a little low. That's okay. And we'll do the expense or liability to VBS materials. So that's all great. We'll hit save. Good. We used our debit card, swiped it on cph.org, and ordered that. Now, if we go back here to the home page, you'll see it down there with your 2 line items. If you click on any one of these, it'll take you back to the transaction. All right, we'll close that, go back here. Now, let's say we're writing a check. Go to new transaction, new check. These are the kind of things that are especially important for volunteers to help track, or for you to help volunteers track this, because oftentimes a checkbook will be shared with the ministry leader. That's not always a great idea, but sometimes you need to do that. And so let's say the craft supplies came. It's the Concordia Publishing House. We'll get to check number in a second. It's from the VBS material. We'll say $50 in crafts. And there's the craft materials expense account. Now, as we look at this, I thought there was a tooltip on there. That usually means that there's not enough money in the account. I don't remember exactly how much we had in there. So we'll just keep moving forward. So it's the same thing as a payment, except now you have this whole preview of a check down below. And you could enter in the memo, so VBS crafts for mission trip, and it'll plug it in, and you can even print this. So we'll hit save, and it's been added to the check queue, and now I can print this out on check paper. Now I could do this all at once, so I can batch print my check. So I go through there, enter the number in after each one. So if I click print, the next thing it's going to ask me, oh, actually I have to hit, this will preview it, and then you click print, and it'll let me know what check number I want to enter in there. So print and payment are checks and payments are almost the same things, but they are a little bit different. All right, the next thing to keep ministry leaders informed would be reconciliation. So again, we are going under the theme, and let me get my wording right, providing the necessary access. It's all about keeping ministry leaders up to date. Ministry leaders are the ones who know whichever expenses, and so as you're looking at reconciliation, that might be something for them too. Now you reconcile only for asset accounts. So we'll click on assets, Bank of Bakersville, and then see here, because that is an asset account, we have reconciled. If I go to unrestricted, because it's a subset of a bank account, I get nothing. So Bank of Bakersfield, and we'll just click reset. So now it gives me this completely different screen where it's got green everywhere and a different heading. Let me walk you through this very briefly. I know we're running closer to being out of time. All right, so in the reconcile mode, you have things that are coming from your bank statement. That's what you should be comparing. It's saying, okay, does my bank statement match what's showing? So you put in the statement date, the initial balance, and so we'll say 600, and the ending balance 875. Now I have to check all the ones that show up on my sheet, and it'll tell me the difference. So statement difference 275, selected difference 475. If you hover over it, it'll show what all is in there. We've still got some work to do, since when we got it, the beginning balance was 600, but ours here is 500. So let's see if I uncheck that. Oh, and why is that taking so long? All right, let me go back here. All right, I'm gonna hit back to reconcile. I'm gonna go back to 600. Sometimes I do my math wrong. 600, and then, oh, I know what I did, something silly. So I'm starting here, my ending balance. I'm gonna go back up there. There we go. I didn't want to include my last one, I want to include my top one. So I looked at the ending balance of my beginning balance, which is the ending balance from last time, the ending balance from this time, and I clicked on those different ones, and that balance is now to 0. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click save, and now my line items are reconciled. So it's a pretty simple process if you're thinking through it right. If the youth leader in this case, or the ministry leader, is getting your bank statement, that might be a good way to go back and forth with this, keeping ministry leaders informed, or at least working together on this to know where all the transactions were. So let's say the bank statement comes to the church because the church manages the bank account. The ministry leader is the one who is kind of reconciling it. You could go through that and say, all right, as I reconcile, these transactions are what I'm showing. These ones are missing. And so while you may be paying attention to the bank statement, we've got these transactions that need to be balanced and they're out. And so it's keeping people together on that. But if you trust the youth leader, in this case, or the ministry leader, to reconcile, you can give them that access to be able to do that. And then they can keep it up to date and always know where it's at. And when they're done balancing it, they can share that with you, or you can always see what that is. And that's just the last part, is where we're going to get into reports. Up here under the event log, you can always see reconciled 5 line items. And so you can click on reconciliation, and there is your reconciliation report, essentially. These things have been cleared. So I hope that makes sense. Sorry, it kind of phased out there for a second. I was confused on what I was doing. But that's the problem when you have a layperson leading this and not a financial expert. All right, let me go back here. The last thing is reports. And we've got about 4 minutes left to go. And that's good. I don't want to spend a lot of time on reports, because the goal is to show how to access them and keep ministry leaders up to date, not go into all the details of them. So before I get into those reports, this view here is very much a report, because you can filter it down by individual accounts and say, all right, let's see our income report for quarter, what are we in, quarter 2. There's our transactions. And so now we have that. That's very much a report. You're going to get the information you need. Now you can always export to Excel and share that. We'll show what that looks like. Where's Excel going to pop open? Here it is on this side of the screen. Okay. So you could do that and print it out. It's just a straight out export from the grid. You could go and print this. And it's, again, very much just the grid. Now, our reports that are in the system up here, general ledger, income and expense, chart of accounts, and balance sheet, those are the basic financial reports you need. And those print a little bit nicer and export a little bit nicer if you need them to. General ledger just shows everything you need. And then you can filter down and say, okay, only show me by payee. There's Concordia Publishing House. Or only show me by VBS material, by that account. Or maybe you want me to group by account and have headings on there. So you've got a lot of options there. And again, time frame can be picked for all of these. The income and expense shows all of your income and expense accounts laid out. You can collapse them to be just grouped income, expense, income less expense. That's one way of doing it. You get to see the budget versus actual, and then the percentage and the remaining, which is just a difference. So sometimes remaining means, what do you mean I have negative 2,000 remaining? What does that mean? Well, in this quarter so far, you've only brought in, or income has been 550, expenses have been 2625. Things like that go into play there. All right, now the next one is let's go down to the balance sheet, because the balance sheet is very similar to the income and expense, except it's the opposite. It's assets less liabilities. So it's money you have, less money you owe. So that's one way of looking at it too. And again, you can go and print these, or better yet, you just give people access to log in and view the reports. Final one is chart of accounts, and this shows everything and where it's at. So there's our income and our expense. And so it shows the starting balance, the ending balance, the debits and credits, and what changed in between. And then also the percentage change, if there is a change there. So if it's just an addition, it doesn't show infinity, because anything that started at 0 would have 100% change, or not even 100%. It's not a proper percentage. So as you're looking at the roles that you want people to have, your youth minister, you may not want them to manage everything within that. but you may want them to be able to view all of those different reports. Now, let's take one step back. We're going to go back into our general book. And there's a lot in here. I want to show this last thing to give you a better idea of how to make it unique to ministry roles. Let's take a look at our chart of accounts. Our chart of accounts is kind of a lot. Oops, there we go. Those are all our assets. Those are all our liabilities. There's all of our income. And then finally, expense. There's a lot there. Let's say as you are creating roles, and this is going to be a more typical situation if you have one set of accounts and you want to add a new one, and let's, I'm not sure what the name is, we'll just call this a, test role right now, and you want them to say, okay, can view, they can't view all accounts. We're going to apply this to general, and we're going to submit that. Now that it knows the book, you can go in here and say view selected accounts. And so you could go in and pick just the ministry accounts that people need. So here's computer and printer maintenance. Maybe this is your IT. It's just those two accounts. We'll close out, submit that. Now that person can only see a subset of accounts. So they're not going to be able to see all the reports. But like I said, that view here is like a report. So we can go in and say, all right, show me, I think printer was one, printer maintenance. We don't have any transactions for this quarter. Let's do, I think most of the transactions were from 2016. There we go, $150. So you can see that because that person has access to that account. You don't have to do it for all accounts, just the specific ones they need. And so if you are in a scenario where you want to keep it to just a few people seeing a few things, not the whole report, you'll share those separately. That's just fine. Or you can give them access to view these full reports. All right, now I am over my time. I don't have any questions in there in the queue right now. So I'm going to ask you one more time, if you've got questions, please go ahead and put them in there. But I'm going to go back here and just give a few last minute notes before we take questions. If you have not started using Church360 Ledger, you can start a free 37-day trial. And we do 37 days, so you can get essentially a month and a week. Some months are shorter, some months are longer, but that gives you a chance to reconcile depending on when you start your month. So 360ledger.com. And then there's my contact information once again, but you can also reach out to our software consultants. They'll be willing to help you out. They can do a personalized demo. They can set up your free trial. They're great to talk to and work with customers every single day. So either one of us is great to talk to. And finally, we've got our question and answers. So I don't have anything in the queue yet. I'll give you another minute or so before I wrap that up. I'll put my contact information back on the screen. Actually, let me go and just do a quick overview of what we covered, because we went through a lot. So to get back to our theme of the day of keeping ministry leaders informed, we showed how you can set up individual ministry accounts. We did that under a separate set of books. You don't have to. You can easily set up all those accounts under your one set of books. But for demonstration purposes, we did it under a separate set. You can enlist ministry leaders' helps with budgets by either giving them access to enter the budgets or sending a spreadsheet to them that you copy and paste and put back in. That's probably the best way of doing it, but if you trust the leaders, it's always good to have help without having that back and forth. Then we talked about how to provide the necessary access, and this has broad reaching impact. So you could choose to give them access to a lot of things like entering transactions, and we showed how to do those different transactions. Or you could just give them the necessary information to view single accounts and only to view. So we did that right at the end there. And then the last thing that we covered was sharing the right reports, which is either your account views or any of those standard reports that are in the system. You can share those through printing, through Excel, or better yet, access to the reports, depending on what your level of trust is with the people and what you share with them. So that is all I've got. I've got no questions waiting for me, so I think what I'll do is I'll put my contact information one last time, and thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you taking time out of your afternoon to learn how Church360 Ledger can help your church keep ministry leaders informed. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But otherwise, have a great rest of the day. Bye.